The void was silent, so utterly silent that even the machine spirits aboard the passing Mechanicum vessel faltered in their hymns. A ripple tore through that silence, invisible yet immense, as if reality itself inhaled in shock. From the black gulfs beyond perception came a streak of burning blue and white, screaming across the dark like a star dragged unwillingly from heaven. It split the firmament, leaving a wound of light in its wake. The auspexes of the Omnissiah's benediction howled in protest. Mago Zetheron, High Lord of the Explorator Fleet, turned his many-eyed gaze toward the anomaly. Binary litanies filled the bridge as servitors calculated impossible readings. It was no meteor, no drifting wreck of forgotten technology. It carried mass and intention. Its descent carved through the thin veil between the materium and the immaterium, the air itself trembling as if in reverence or fear. When it struck, the shockwave rolled for leagues across the dead plains of Great. Sand turned to glass. The sky burned red with ignited dust and residual plasma. In the crater's heart lay a figure, motionless, haloed in smoke and soft azure light. A squad of Skitarii, their red cloaks whipping in the scalding wind, descended into the pit. They advanced with lost carbines raised, their vox lines whispering the canticles of cleansing. But when the smoke cleared, their discipline faltered. What they beheld was no Xeno, no servitor construct, but a man, impossibly human, yet sculpted beyond the measure of mortals. He wore armor not of ceramite but of some alien alloy, scarred yet gleaming with blue enamel and white stripes. A circular shield rested at his side, emblazoned with a star that radiated faint light even amid the ashes. The Magos approached, mechadendrites clicking softly. His augurs detected no warp taint, no genre modification of imperial origin, yet the readings were wrong. The energy coursing through the shield was stable, pure, neither psychic nor technological as known to the Mechanicum. It was as though it drew strength from belief itself. Preserve the specimen Zethion ordered, his vox distorted and cold. The Omnissiah's will guides this find. When the figure stirred, the soldiers recoiled. The sound of armor plate shifting was followed by a groan. Low, human, weary. The man's eyes opened, pale blue, reflecting both pain and purpose. He inhaled the scorched air like one reborn, confusion flickering across his face before instinct settled in. He moved with the precision of a trained warrior, hand finding the shield before any could react. The Skitarii encircled him. Commands crackled in Binheric. Bolters hummed to life. The man rose to his full height, posture calm yet unyielding. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice clear, steady, carrying authority that no one present could quite defy. The Magos processed the sound through countless algorithms. "You are upon sacred ground of the Omnissiah," he replied, the words translating through vox distortion. "Identify your forge, your legion, your homeworld." The man frowned. "Brooklyn," he said softly, as though naming a dream. "United States of America." None understood. The Magos concluded corruption or madness. A sedate him came the command. The Skitarii advanced, but the man moved faster than any mortal should. His shield blurred, deflecting a burst of tranquilizer darts and sending one soldier sprawling. He did not kill, only disarmed, his motions disciplined and precise. Yet his restraint was met with mechanical fury. Lost fire erupted. Bolts of crimson light seared the air. The man raised his shield again, sparks cascading as energy splashed harmlessly against it. Fu. The ground trembled beneath the onslaught, smoke rising like incense before a forgotten altar. Then, as swiftly as it began, the firing ceased. Mago Zetheron extended a hand of iron and logic. "Enough," he hissed. "Observe. The pattern, the shield redirects energy harmonically. This is not witchcraft. This is something else." The stranger stood unmoved, his breathing steady. Slowly he lowered the shield. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I don't even know where I am." The Magos' optical array's word. "You stand within the Imperium of Man under the gaze of the Omnissiah and the Emperor Divine." The words meant nothing to him, yet something in their gravity stirred a soldier's instinct, a recognition of authority, but also of danger. "Imperium," he repeated. "It sounds like an empire." The Magos inclined his head slightly. "All that exists within the light of humanity belongs to him on Terra." For a moment, the man's expression darkened. Empires had never been his calling. He fought for people, not thrones. Yet this was not his world, nor his war. As the Mechanicum chanted the litanies of containment, he allowed himself to be taken aboard their ship. Shackles bound his wrists, though none could shake the feeling that he permitted it. The engines roared, lifting from the scorched plains, carrying with them the man who had fallen like a meteor from another age. In the observation dome of the Omnissiah's benediction, the void stretched endlessly, stars cold and watchful. The stranger gazed out through the reinforced glass, his mind adrift in fragments, faces, battles, an ending frozen in ice. He remembered sacrifice, the crash into darkness, the promise that he would return to a better world. But this was no better world. Behind him, adepts whispered. Data streams carried his image across the Mechanicum networks. The Omnissiah's priests speculated endlessly. Some claimed he was an ancient proto-Astartes, others a living weapon of the dark age of technology. Yet one fragment of transmission reached Terra itself, carried by the quiet hum of fate. The Emperor would soon know. And in that moment, somewhere deep within the warp, something stirred, an echo of light defiant against the eternal dark. The man turned his gaze downward, fingers brushing the surface of his shield. The star upon it glimmered faintly, as though answering a call from far beyond the stars. He did not yet know the name of this age, nor the nature of its wars, but he felt, in his heart, that whatever power had brought him here had not done so by mistake. For even in the endless night of the 41st millennium, hope had fallen once more from the heavens, burning, unbroken, and very much alive. Cold light bathed the chamber of steel. The air was thick with incense and static as the figure lay suspended within a containment cradle, bound by grav clamps and humming fields of energy. Cogitators lined the walls, their binary murmurs weaving hymns to the Omnissiah. The stranger's breathing was steady, his body encased in a faint glow that refused to dim no matter how the Mechanicum adjusted the lumen output. Mago Zetheron stood before him, mechanical limbs shifting with slow reverence, and regarded the shield resting beside the cradle. The star upon its surface pulsed faintly, rhythmic, deliberate. The Magos had run every analysis known to Mars, spectrographic breakdowns, atomic scans, psychic resonance tests. All had failed. The material resisted classification, neither plasteel nor adamantium, immune even to the probing touch of machine spirits. It was a paradox, a relic of perfect craftsmanship with no trace of the Omnissiah's mark. When the man awoke, the senses registered no surge of adrenaline or confusion. Confusion. His eyes opened as though from disciplined rest. "You could have just asked for a conversation," he said quietly, voice resonating in the steel cathedral. Zetheron's Vox unit crackled. "You are an unknown element. Protocol requires containment until purity is verified. You will cooperate." The man glanced at the steel tendrils and the faceless adepts around him. "I'm not your enemy. But I won't let you chain me forever." The Magos approached, data cables trailing behind him like metallic serpents. "Your physiology is pure baseline human, yet your musculature exceeds known parameters by 200%. Your regenerative capacity is extraordinary, and the alloy of your armor, unknown, possibly pre-imperial." "Explain." "I don't know what your imperial means," he replied evenly. "I fought a war. A long time ago, I gave everything to stop it. Then nothing. Ice, darkness. I woke up here." Binary murmurs rippled through the adepts. Zetheron processed the words with machine precision. A temporal dislocation. Perhaps a fragment of the Dark Age. "But your speech patterns and cultural lexicon are primitive." He ignored the insult. "Where am I really?" The Mago's optics flared. "You stand within the Imperium of Man, servant of the machine god. Beyond this fleet lies the Great Crusade, waged by the Emperor himself to reclaim the galaxy." The words struck him like distant thunder, too vast to comprehend yet carrying the weight of destiny. He looked to his shield, its star gleaming faintly. "So humanity survived," he murmured. "But at what cost?" "He survived," Zetheron echoed and ascended. He gestured to a servo skull hovering near freeing. "But transmit coordinates to Terra. This subject must be presented for evaluation by the throne." The cradle released with a hiss. The man stood, his height imposing even among the augmented priests. Guards watched him warily as he reclaimed the shield. For a moment silence ruled the chamber. Then a low alarm broke through the calm Vox signals from the outer decks. Unidentified vessels emerging from the warp, a Skitarii officer announced through a burst of static. A configuration, heretical signatures, possibly warp-spawned entities. Zetheron's tone sharpened. A defensive formations, lenations. "Prepare the litanies of denial." The stranger turned toward the sound of distant gunfire. "You're under attack?" Our containment protocols remain active, Zethion replied. Do not interfere. He hesitated only a heartbeat before ignoring the order. Striding past the startled Skitarii, he reached the nearest blast door as the first tremors shook the ship. Red warning sigils flared across the bulkheads. When the door parted, the sight beyond froze him. The void outside burned with colors that should not exist. Vessels of twisted iron and flesh swam through the black, their hulls screaming like living things. Fire blossomed across the Mechanicum fleet as boarding torpedoes struck home. The Magos followed, shouting binary commands, but it was too late. The man leapt into motion, shield raised, charging down the corridor toward the screams. A detachment of corrupted abominations, once men now warped mockeries, tore through the first defense line. He met them head-on, shield flashing with impossible precision. A clawed limb shattered against its surface, a bolter round ricocheted harmlessly aside. He moved like a storm, every strike measured, every defense perfect. Zethion watched through his ocular feed, torn between awe and fear. This warrior fought with the purity of faith, yet without invoking the Emperor's name. His strength came not from machine or warp, but from conviction. When the final creature fell, the air filled with smoke and the smell of burnt flesh. The man stood unmoved, breathing heavy but calm. The Mechanicum soldiers stared in stunned silence. Zethion approached, his voice quieter than before. You defied protocol. Yet without your interference, this deck would have fallen. The man lowered his shield, the faint light of the star flickering across his face. But you wanted proof of who I am, he said simply. That's it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly the Magos bowed his head, a rare gesture among the Mechanicum. Perhaps the Omnissiah's hand guided your arrival. The Emperor will decide your fate. Until then, you shall be treated as a guest of the fleet. He nodded, though the word guest felt hollow. As the alarms faded, he looked once more at the void through a viewport. Among the wreckage, fragments of light drifted like dying embers. This universe was far colder than the one he had known, but it was still his duty to stand against its darkness. Behind him, the adepts whispered again, some with awe, others with fear. The Magos recorded every motion, every pulse of the mysterious shield. His report would soon reach Terra, and the Emperor's attention would turn toward the star that fell from another world. The man stared into the abyss, his reflection gleaming faintly in the glass. The stars offered no comfort, but he felt the weight of purpose settle upon him once more. Wherever he was, whatever this Imperium truly meant, he would not bow. Somewhere beyond sight, the warp whispered his name, testing, remembering. The light on his shield flared as though rejecting the darkness itself. And far away on the distant cradle of mankind, the Emperor of humanity turned his gaze toward the void. The journey to Terra was long, a crawl through the endless black where even the stars seemed to bow before the will of mankind's empire. The Mechanicum vessel traveled in silence, its crew murmuring prayers to the machine god as it entered the sacred boundaries of Sol. The man who had fallen from the void stood at the viewport, watching the sun's golden fire spill across the hull. It was vast, ancient, and alive, a god in its own right. Yet even that star seemed dim beneath the looming shadow of Terra. Below him, the world of humanity's cradle shone like a wounded jewel, scarred by centuries of war, covered in the endless sprawl of cathedrals, manufactorums, and fortresses. Titans walked its horizons, and orbital stations hung in orbit like silent sentinels. He felt awe, but also sorrow. Whatever this Imperium was, it had built its glory upon chains. Zethiron's voice broke the silence. Prepare yourself. You are to be delivered unto the Sigillites' custody. The Emperor has decreed your presence be judged in his sight. So, the title meant little to him, yet something in the Magos' mechanical tone carried reverence bordering on worship. The man nodded, fastening his shield to his arm as the ship descended through the polluted skies. Lightning danced among the clouds, guided by the will of weather control engines. As the vessel breached the lower atmosphere, he caught glimpses of colossal statues, warriors and kings cast in adamantine, each standing hundreds of meters tall. Their faces were worn by age and devotion, staring eternally toward the heavens. The docking platform was a cathedral of steel and gold. Custodians awaited him, towering figures in Oromite armor, each radiating the power of gods. Their visors reflected the world in shards of gold. One stepped forward, voice calm yet unyielding. You will come with us, stranger. Speak no falsehoods before the throne. He followed without resistance. The corridors were vast, built not for men but for legends. He could feel the weight of humanity's history pressing down from the walls, mosaics depicting crusades, burning worlds, and the Emperor's divine triumphs. At the end of it all, a door stood, carved from obsidian and sealed by psychic wards that shimmered faintly in the air. It opened without sound. Inside was silence deeper than the void. He stepped into a hall lit by a single beam of golden light that seemed to exist beyond the material world. At its center stood a figure, robed, still, and radiant. The Emperor of Mankind was unlike anything mortal. His presence was not light, but the idea of light, the embodiment of creation itself. To look upon him was to glimpse both infinity and final judgment. The man froze, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that this being knew him. When the Emperor spoke, his voice filled not the air but the mind, vast and resonant. "You are not of this age." The words pierced through the man's thoughts, unraveling every memory, every doubt. "No," he answered softly. "We come from another time, another world." The Emperor descended the dais with measured grace, his gaze unblinking. "You fell through the fabric of creation. The warp remembers your passage, though it cannot claim you. That is curious." "We don't know how I came here," the man said, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "But if this world is at war, if people are suffering, then I'll fight to protect them. That's who I am." The Emperor's eyes glimmered like twin suns. Wait, twin suns. "You speak of protection, yet you stand in the shadow of destiny. Here there is no peace, no freedom, only the will of mankind's survival. Your ideals are a remnant of a gentler dream, one long dead." "Maybe," the man replied, "but dreams die only when we stop believing in them." For the first time the Emperor paused. The custodian shifted uneasily, for such defiance was rare, yet the Emperor did not strike him down. Instead he raised a hand, and in the air appeared visions, worlds aflame, alien empires crushed beneath golden banners, and the endless march of the legions. "This is the Great Crusade," the Emperor said. "The unification of mankind under one truth. Would you fight for such a cause?" He stared at the visions. The soldiers fought with devotion, but their faces bore no joy. Their triumphs were stained with ruin. "If that's unity," he said quietly, "then it's built on fear, not hope." The Emperor's gaze darkened, yet not with anger, rather with ancient weariness. "You remind me of what humanity once sought to be," he said, almost to himself. "A guardian, not a conqueror. Yet the galaxy leaves no room for sentiment." "I've heard that before," the man replied, lifting his shield. "But where I come from, we learned that strength means nothing if it crushes what it's meant to protect." The chamber trembled, as though the words themselves challenged the throne. Then slowly the Emperor smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. "You are an anomaly, yet your spirit is untainted. Perhaps you are not a threat, but a test." He turned to the custodians. "Take him to Luna. Let Horus judge his worth. If he survives the crucible, he will serve the Imperium. If not, cast his remains into the void from whence he came." The light dimmed as the Emperor returned to his throne, his presence withdrawing like a tide. The man bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. As he turned to leave, he felt the Emperor's voice echo within his mind once more, softer now, almost human. Stephen Rogers, remember that hope is both weapon and curse. He froze. No one on this world had spoken his name until that moment. When he looked back, the Emperor was silent once more, his eyes closed in meditation, the weight of a god upon his shoulders. Led away by the golden warriors, Rogers felt the enormity of what lay ahead. He had faced tyrants, armies, and monsters, but never something like this, a war for the soul of humanity itself. As the gates closed behind him, he took one last look toward the beam of golden light and whispered under his breath, "Then let's see what kind of world you're building." The custodian glanced at him but said nothing. In the echoing corridors of the imperial palace, the sound of his footsteps faded into the song of distant machinery and prayer. Far above, the Emperor's gaze lingered in silence. The warp trembled once more, not from rage but from recognition. Something pure had entered its game, and even the gods of chaos turned their eyes toward terror. The transport descended through the pale mists of Luna, engines humming like a cathedral choir. Captain Rogers stood in silence within the hold, his shield slung across his back, the golden-armored custodian standing guard beside him. The air smelled of ozone and sanctified oil. The Emperor's words still echoed in his mind, "Let Horus judge his worth." He knew nothing of this Horus, yet the tone in which the title had been spoken carried weight, reverence, and danger. The hangar bay of the lunar citadel was a fortress of pale stone and gold, its architecture towering like a monument to victory itself. Legionnaires in grey and white armor stood in formation, their helms polished to mirror brightness, each bearing the sigil of the lunar wolves. Their discipline was absolute. Not a sound echoed save the distant hiss of the cooling engines. From among them stepped a figure whose very presence commanded silence. Horus Lupercal, first Primarch of the Imperium, the Warmaster-to-be, moved with the grace of a predator and the calm of a king. His armor gleamed like the dawn marked by the wolf's head sigil, and his eyes carried a strange mixture of warmth and fathomless power. When he approached, the custodian stepped aside without word. "So," Horus said, his voice deep, rich, and surprisingly human. "You are the stranger the Emperor spoke of." Rogers studied him carefully. This man was no machine, no blind servant of doctrine. There was life and charisma in him, a spark of leadership that felt familiar. He nodded once. "I suppose I am. You're Horus." The Primarch smiled faintly. "I am. Wim. And you, Stephen Rogers, Captain. A title of command, yet you come without soldiers." "I had them once," Rogers replied quietly. "They gave everything they had." Horus's gaze softened. "Then you know sacrifice." He turned, gesturing for Rogers to follow. "Walk with me. My father wishes me to see what kind of man you are before the Crusade welcomes, or destroys you." They moved through the corridors of the fortress, past banners of conquest and halls lined with statues of fallen heroes. The air was heavy with incense and memory. Outside, through vast crystal panes, lunar surface glimmered beneath the distant sun, scarred by industry and fortified for eternity. Horus spoke first. "You should know, Captain, the Emperor sees much in you, but he also sees danger. You are a fragment from another age carrying ideas that have long since withered. Freedom, choice, compassion. These are luxuries the Imperium cannot afford." Rogers met his gaze. "What's the point of conquering the stars if you have to lose what makes you human to do it?" Horus laughed softly, though there was no mockery in it. "You speak like one untouched by the galaxy's cruelty. You will learn soon enough that mercy is a currency spent quickly." They entered a training arena vast enough to house a Titan's foot. Legionaries watched from balconies as the two men stepped into the center. "You will fight me," Horus said simply, "and not to win, but to be understood." Rogers raised a brow. "And if I refuse?" Horus's smile faded. "Then you will have refused the Emperor's will. And that, Captain, is not something this Imperium forgives." He said nothing more. The Primarch removed his cloak and drew his blade, a relic that shimmered with faint energy fields, its edge whispering through the air like thunder restrained. Rogers tightened the straps on his shield. There was no anger in him, only resolve. When Horus struck, it was like facing the storm itself. His blows were measured yet immense, each one cracking the air with enough force to shatter steel. Rogers moved by instinct, his shield flashing like a mirror of light, deflecting strikes that would have cleaved tanks in half. Sparks filled the arena. The impact of metal on metal echoed like a hymn. "You fight well for one so small," Horus said between strikes. "Small doesn't mean weak," Rogers replied, ducking under a swing and countering with a shield bash that made the Primarch take a half step back, a first judging by the murmurs from the spectators. Horus's grin returned. "Feral now. Good. Show me your spirit, Captain of another age." The duel became a storm. Rogers knew he could not overpower a Primarch, but he adapted, reading the rhythm, striking where precision mattered more than strength. His shield met the blade again and again, deflecting, absorbing, redirecting. The arena floor cracked beneath their feet. At last Horus struck with a feint, catching Rogers across the chest and sending him sprawling. The shield flew from his grasp, skittering across the stone. The legionaries roared approval, but Horus silenced them with a gesture. Rogers rose slowly, chest heaving, blood trickling down his arm. He stared at the Primarch, not with fear but defiance. Then he walked toward his fallen shield, retrieved it, and stood once more. "I'm not done." The words hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself. Horus's eyes gleamed with admiration. "You remind me of my brothers before the wars hardened them," he said quietly. "You fight not for conquest, but for belief. That is rare among men, and dangerous." He sheathed his blade and stepped forward. "Enough. You have proven yourself. The Emperor was right. There is something in you worth keeping." The crowd dispersed and Rogers followed as Horus led him to a balcony overlooking the void. The earth hung below, vast and blue, wrapped in clouds and history. "This is what we fight for," Horus said, his voice distant. "A humanity united. No more war between our kind, no more ignorance or superstition, but peace. Peace demands obedience." Rogers studied the world beneath them. "A peace without freedom isn't peace," he said. "It's a cage painted gold." Horus turned expression unreadable. "You would defy even the Emperor's design for the sake of an ideal." "I'd defy anyone who tells me men can't choose for themselves," Rogers answered. The Primarch's gaze lingered, then softened into something like sorrow. "Then may the stars have mercy on you, Captain, for the Imperium will not." He left Rogers standing alone, the echo of his boots fading into silence. The captain turned his eyes once more towards Terra, the heart of the Imperium, glowing faintly through the void. He could feel the eyes of gods and men upon him, testing, weighing his worth. He tightened his grip on the shield. Whatever trial awaited him among the stars, he knew this much: the fight for freedom had never truly ended. It had only moved to a darker battlefield. And somewhere deep within the warp, unseen, the Chaos Gods laughed softly, for they too had taken notice of the man who would not kneel. The fleet departed lunar under the light of a dying sun, its engines roaring with the hymns of conquest. Within the command vessel Gloriana's Oath, Captain Stephen Rogers stood among the lunar wolves, the first mortal ever to march beside the Emperor's John-forged sons. The corridors vibrated with the thunder of war prayers, the scent of oil and sanctified incense filling the air. He moved silently through them, his presence a quiet anomaly in the grand machinery of the Great Crusade. Horus had not spoken to him since their duel, yet the Primarch's command had been clear. Rogers would serve as an observer, and if worthy, a warrior, in the coming campaign on the world of Carthanon, a rebellious planet refusing imperial compliance. The captain watched from the stratagem as holographic maps flickered above the table, displaying the enemy's mountain fortresses, vast and fortified against the Imperium's reach. The Lunar Wolves officers murmured of orbital bombardment and annihilation, but Rogers's gaze lingered on the thousands of civilians marked as collateral losses. He said nothing, but the silence between him and Horus grew heavy. When the fleet translated from the warp, Carthanon loomed below, an emerald world wrapped in cloud and defiance. Dropships descended like silver comets, each bearing the Imperium's fury. Rogers stood among the Astartes in the landing bay, armor modified for him by Mechanicum artisans, lightweight ceramite plates shaped to his frame, painted deep blue, a white star etched upon the chest. His shield, unchanged, gleamed brighter than ever beneath the ship's lumen strip. The ramp lowered, fire and wind swallowed them. The assault began, bolters thundered. The lunar wolves advanced in flawless formation, their storm of shells tearing through the rebel lines. Rogers kept pace among giants, his shield a blur of motion, deflecting plasma bursts and returning them with precision. He fought without hesitation, yet unlike the others, he did not kill to conquer, only to protect. When an explosion threw a wounded soldier into the open, Rogers broke formation, rushing through the smoke to drag the man to safety. An Astartes sergeant barked at him to hold position, but the captain ignored it. After the battle's first hour, Horus himself descended to the surface, his presence rallying the legion like a sun among storms. Rogers found him amidst the chaos, the Primarch's armor drenched in the blood of enemies. "You fight with courage," Horus said, his voice cutting through the din. "But your defiance of command endangers the mission." Rogers met his gaze through the smoke. "Saving lives isn't defiance." Horus's eyes narrowed. "This is not your world, Captain. Obedience keeps men alive. Mercy wastes them." It may be," Rogers said, lifting his shield as shells screamed overhead, "but I didn't come here to learn obedience." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Horus's laughter boomed across the field, low and fierce. "Very well," he said. "Then lead, and let your ideals prove stronger than my son's fury." It was not a command, it was a challenge. Rogers turned to the soldiers pinned behind a ruined hab block and raised his voice. "On your feet, form up, cover the wounded, move." His tone carried the old fire of the battlefield, and even the hardened lunar wolves found themselves obeying. They advanced behind his shield, each movement a rhythm of precision and courage. Rogers charged through the breach, deflecting volleys meant for others, striking with brutal efficiency. The tide began to turn, not through overwhelming might, but through the unity he inspired. Hours passed like lifetimes. By nightfall, the rebels' banners fell, their stronghold breached. The Imperium's victory was absolute. But amid the smoking ruins, Rogers walked among the wounded enemy and ally alike, offering water, tending to injuries. Astartes watched in silence, their iron discipline cracking as they witnessed something unfamiliar. Compassion on a battlefield meant only for domination. When the last flames dimmed, Horus found him again, standing before a shattered cathedral. The Primarch's face was unreadable, his voice quiet. You turned what should have been slaughter into surrender. The rebels laid down arms because they believed you would spare them. They're human, Rogers said. They were fighting for what they thought was right. Maybe next time they'll fight for you because they choose to, not because they're forced. Horus regarded him for a long moment. A choice, he said softly as if testing the word, a dangerous gift. He turned to the burning horizon. You have earned respect among my sons. Some call you the Terran Paragon. Others call you fool. Rogers looked up at the sky where the stars burned through the smoke. I've been called both before. Horus smiled faintly. The Emperor will hear of this. Perhaps you are more than an echo from a forgotten past. Before Rogers could reply, the ground trembled. From the ruins emerged a surviving rebel officer, armed with a plasma pistol, his face a mask of hatred. The shot fired. Horus turned too late. Rogers moved instinctively. The bolt struck his shield and ricocheted, searing his armor but sparing the Primarch. In an instant, Astartes' fire obliterated the attacker. Rogers staggered, smoke curling from the scorched edge of his shield. Horus caught his arm before he could fall. You would give your life for me. The Primarch asked, surprise flickering in his eyes. Rogers steadied himself, grimacing. Not for you. For the man beside me. Horus studied him in silence, then nodded once. Then perhaps you understand brotherhood better than any of us. The battlefield was quiet now, the dead bathed in the red light of dawn. Rogers looked across the ruins and saw not victory, but the heavy cost of it. The Imperium had won another world, but at what price? As the fleet ascended once more, Horus stood at the viewing deck beside him. You have seen the Great Crusade, Captain. You have fought its battles. Tell me, what do you think of our Emperor's dream now? Rogers watched the burning planet fade into the void. A dream's built on blood, he said. Don't stay dreams for long. They become nightmares. Horus said nothing. The silence between them was heavier than any chain. Far away, the Emperor watched through unseen eyes, and in that quiet void between stars, destiny began to shift, ever so slightly, around the man with the shield of a lost world. The great ship drifted through the void, carrying the echoes of another conquered world. Yet victory, as always, was silent in its aftermath. The lunar wolves celebrated below decks with chants of glory and oaths to the Emperor, but Captain Rogers stood apart, his gaze fixed upon the stars beyond the viewport. Each light out there was a world waiting to be claimed, or broken. He had fought among gods and monsters, seen the might of the Imperium unleashed upon mortals, and now the weight of it pressed upon him. The armor they had given him bore the marks of battle, the blue dulled by ash and time, but the star upon his chest still gleamed faintly, a stubborn symbol that refused to fade. When Horus entered the observation chamber, Rogers did not turn. The Primarch's reflection appeared beside his own, towering and still. You've earned your place among us, Horus said, voice steady, yet carrying the weariness of command. The men speak your name as though it were a banner. The Emperor himself has heard of your deeds. Rogers gave a quiet nod. I didn't come here to be a symbol. I came because your world needed saving. Horus chuckled softly. Every world needs saving, Captain. That is the curse of mankind. Silence stretched between them. Through the glass, a fleet of smaller ships drifted by, each one filled with soldiers, zealots, dreamers. Rogers wondered how many truly believed in the cause they served, and how many simply obeyed because it was all they knew. Later, when the ship reached orbit over Terra, Rogers was summoned to the Hall of Unity. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, walls lined with banners of every legion. In the center stood an immense display of the Crusade's progress, hundreds of worlds illuminated in gold, thousands more in red, still awaiting conquest. A voice called his name. Malkador the Sigilite stepped forward from the circle of advisors, his aged eyes sharp and knowing. The Emperor sees potential in you, he said. A warrior unbound by his Jongcraft, yet uncorrupted by the warp. You are a mirror of what humanity once was. I'm just a soldier, Rogers replied quietly. Malkador smiled thinly. Perhaps? but symbols move armies more surely than orders. Abi, the Sigillite, led him through corridors lined with marble statues, heroes and martyrs of the Imperium's early wars. They stopped before a great door, its surface etched with celestial patterns. "There is something you must understand before the Emperor grants you command," Malcador said. "The Imperium is not built on hope. It is built on compliance. Unity requires the silencing of doubt." Rogers met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "Then it's not unity, it's control." "Call it what you will," Malcador replied. "But control is what keeps the galaxy from tearing itself apart." Inside the chamber beyond, Rogers was presented before a council of generals and Primarch envoys. Horus stood among them, silent but watchful. The Emperor was not present, yet his presence filled the room like sunlight unseen. The council spoke of Rogers' valor, his tactical mind, his ability to inspire the mortal ranks. They named him the Shield of Terror, a living symbol of the Imperium's purity, a figure to rally humanity beneath the Emperor's light, but the title sat like a chain around his neck. When they placed before him the standard he was to bear, an imperial eagle painted upon white silk, he saw in it not hope, but the shadow of tyranny. Still, he took it in silence. After the meeting, Horus joined him in the long hall that led back toward the docks. "You should be proud," the Primarch said. "A few mortals stand where you have stood." Rogers walked slowly, the banner folded under one arm. "Think pride matters to me? I've seen what your unity costs. Cities burned, children killed for not bowing fast enough. If this is what your Emperor calls peace, it's built on graves." Horus's tone hardened. "You forget yourself, Captain. The Emperor does not wage war for pleasure. He fights because he must. The galaxy is filled with horrors beyond your imagining. Xenos, heretics, demons. You saw only one world. We see all of them. I've fought monsters too," Rogers said, turning to face him. "But the difference is we never became them to win." For a moment, neither moved. Then Horus's voice dropped, quieter, heavier. "You speak dangerous words. The Emperor's faith in you is not infinite. He will not tolerate dissent, no matter how noble." "Or maybe he should hear dissent," Rogers answered. "Or maybe he's forgotten what it means to be human." Horus's gaze flickered with something almost like pity. "You still think of him as a man. You'll learn soon enough." In the weeks that followed, Rogers traveled with the fleet to several newly compliant worlds. He fought beside the Lunar Wolves, guiding mortal regiments, saving lives the legions deemed expendable. The name Shield of Terror spread quickly, among soldiers, among the conquered, even whispered among slaves who saw him as proof that mercy still existed within the Imperium's endless wars. Yet such hope was dangerous. The Inquisition had not yet been born, but the mechanisms of suspicion were already in place. Reports began to circulate of a warrior who questioned orders, who stayed executions, who preached compassion where fear should reign. When Rogers returned to the flagship, a summons awaited him, not from Horus, but from the Emperor himself. The message was brief, written in golden script. "Your light burns bright. But remember, too much light can blind." He read the words in silence, then set the message down. The chamber around him was quiet, save for the distant hum of the ship's engines. He looked to his shield, resting by his side, its surface reflecting the light of distant stars. For the first time he wondered if his presence here was not salvation but disruption, a flaw in destiny's design. Still, he could not change who he was. He was the man who stood when all others bowed, who believed that courage meant more than obedience. The Imperium could make him a weapon, a relic, a symbol, but it could never make him forget what he fought for. Far across the stars, unseen and unbidden, the warp rippled faintly in response, like dark water disturbed by a falling stone. The gods within stirred, sensing a new kind of defiance, a light that did not come from faith, but from conviction. And somewhere deep within the Emperor's palace, a man of gold paused in his meditation, feeling the tremor of something that should not exist. Hope, pure and unbroken, burning still within the heart of man. The crusade moved onward, endless and unrelenting, its fleets like burning constellations spreading the Emperor's will to every corner of the void. Captain Rogers had long since ceased counting the worlds. They blurred together, each bearing the same pattern: resistance, compliance, silence. Some welcomed the Imperium's light, others died in defiance. Yet with every conquest, Rogers saw less light and more shadow. The ship Gloriana's Oath carried him now to the Calthan Reach, a sector already under the influence of the Raventine Legion, the word bearers. It was said that they brought not only conquest, but faith, their every battle wrapped in scripture and fire. Rogers had heard their name whispered by Mechanicum adepts with a mixture of reverence and unease. They build churches where they are told to build cities, Horus had once said. The Emperor frowns upon it, but he tolerates their zeal, as long as it serves his purpose. When the Lunar Wolves fleet arrived, the word bearers were already entrenched upon the surface of Surinar Prime, a world of black stone and storm-choked skies. Rogers descended with the command retinue, his eyes narrowing as the air grew thick with incense and smoke. Great spires of carved obsidian rose from the plains, covered in runes and prayers written in the High Gothic tongue. At the center of the landing field stood a figure in crimson armor, his helm crested with a halo of gold. Lorga Aurelian, Primarch of the Word Bearers, awaited them with the serene composure of a preacher welcoming his congregation. When Horus approached, the two embraced as brothers, their words muffled beneath the thunder of the gathering storm. Rogers watched, sensing something beneath Lorga's calm, a hunger that felt older than devotion. When their greetings were done, Lorga's gaze shifted to Rogers. "So this is the shield of terror," he said, voice smooth and measured. "The mortal who stands among gods." Rogers inclined his head. "I'm just a man trying to keep people alive." "A noble lie," Lorga replied, smiling faintly. "You carry the light of belief within you, Captain. That is no small thing. That is no small thing." "Tell me then, what do you believe in?" Rogers hesitated, the weight of his own memories pressing behind his words. "In people. In their right to choose, in the idea that good can exist even in the darkest places." Lorga's eyes brightened with something like delight. "Ah, then you are a believer indeed. You speak of faith without knowing its name." "I'm not talking about gods," Rogers said. The Primarch's smile did not fade. "All men are, whether they admit it or not." That evening, Rogers was invited to a gathering within one of the newly erected cathedrals. The walls were alive with light from burning censers, the air heavy with the scent of myrrh and metal. The word bearers knelt in rows, chanting hymns to the Emperor as if he were a divine being, not the living man Rogers had spoken to. The sound was haunting, beautiful, and wrong. When the service ended, Lorga approached him once more. "You see now," he said quietly, "why the Imperium endures. Not through fear, nor through force, but through faith. They need to believe their Emperor is more than mortal. They need to believe he is their salvation." Rogers shook his head. "A faith like that turns into worship, and worship becomes chains." Lorga's eyes gleamed. "Chains, yes. But some men need chains. Without them, they fall to chaos." The word struck him. Chaos. It carried weight, the way a blade carries promise. "What do you mean by that?" Rogers asked. The Primarch turned away, hands clasped behind his back. "There are forces in this galaxy, Captain, vast and unseen. The Emperor denies them, but they are as old as time itself. They whisper in the hearts of men, shaping every act of love, hate, and creation. You've felt it, haven't you? The presence in the void that watches you when you dream." Rogers' jaw tightened. "I've seen darkness, but it never made me bow to it." Lorga smiled again, softer this time. "You mistake me. I do not bow, I listen. And I believe even the greatest light cannot burn without shadow." He walked away, leaving Rogers alone among the flickering candles. Yet the words lingered. Lingered. That night, as the storm howled outside, Rogers could not sleep. He thought of the Emperor's stern gaze, of Horus's words about obedience, of the countless dead whose names would never be remembered. He wondered if Lorga's heresy was born not of rebellion but of longing, for meaning in a universe of endless war. The following day, the crusade pressed onward. Rogers led a mortal regiment through the lower districts of Surinar Prime, rooting out the last rebel holdouts. Amid the chaos, he found an old shrine, ancient, predating even Imperial arrival. Its carvings showed not the Emperor, but something else, 4 figures, vast and terrible, etched into the walls like half-forgotten gods. When he touched the stone, he felt a pulse beneath his hand, faint but alive, as if the world itself remembered. He drew back sharply, heart pounding. The air grew colder, and for an instant he thought he heard whispers, soft, familiar, almost human. He closed his eyes, forcing them away. When he opened them again, the voices were gone, but the unease remained. Later, in the War Council, Horus and Lorga spoke of progress, of victories and compliance. Rogers listened in silence until the topic turned to the destruction of the old shrines. They should be preserved, he said suddenly. Their history, not heresy. Lorga's gaze flicked to him. History is the root of belief, and belief is dangerous when it belongs to the wrong god. Horus gave a warning glance, but Lorga's smile only deepened. Be careful, Captain. The Emperor forbids worship, yet he demands devotion. You stand between truths, and that is a perilous place. Rogers met his eyes. He may be the truth, the only thing worth standing between. The Primarch studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head. You may yet understand. As the council dispersed, Horus caught Rogers's arm. But do not let him draw you into his philosophies. Lorga is a poet in a world that needs warriors. Rogers looked down at the shield on his arm, its surface scarred but unbroken. Sometimes warriors need poets to remind them why they fight. Horus's expression darkened, or to make them forget who they fight for. That night, Rogers stood alone on the observation deck, watching Cyrano fade into the void. The storm clouds parted briefly, revealing the stars. Cold, eternal, silent. Somewhere out there, he felt something move, a whisper faint as breath. It spoke no words, only a feeling. Curiosity. The warp had noticed him, and though he did not yet know it, the seed sown on that world would one day grow into the greatest heresy the galaxy had ever known. The voyage from Cyrano Prime was long, the void around the fleet darker than usual, as if the stars themselves had dimmed in mourning. The soldiers spoke of omens, lights moving where none should be, vox signals echoing in reverse, prayers answered by voices that were not their own. Even the lunar wolves grew uneasy, though they did not show it. Captain Rogers walked among them, feeling the tension like a pressure in his chest. The whispers had not left him since Cyrano. They came now in dreams, soft, persistent, and cold. He stood in the stratagem one evening, watching the hollow projection of their next destination, a dying Eldar craftworld adrift on the edge of the segmentum solar. Its orbit was unstable, its core fractured by war and time. Horus had decreed its destruction, calling it a den of heretical Xenos, but to Rogers it looked less like a fortress and more like a grave. When the fleet entered orbit, the void churned with unnatural color. The craftworld hung before them, vast and broken, shards of wraithbone glinting like bone under ghostlight. As the strike cruisers deployed, Rogers joined the vanguard squad, his shield sealed to his arm. He had seen alien worlds before, but nothing like this. The Eldar structures curved like living veins, pulsing faintly with energy. It was beauty twisted by tragedy. The landing was silent. No enemy fire greeted them, only the whisper of the wind through hollow corridors. The lunar wolves advanced with caution, bolters raised, their armor lights cutting pale paths through the darkness. Rogers followed, senses on edge. Every step echoed as though the world itself were listening. Then came the first voice, not through his vox, but in his mind. A whisper, distant, almost mournful. You do not belong here. He froze. The Astartes around him took no notice. The voice returned, clearer now, threading through his thoughts like smoke. You walk in a place between dreams, child of another dawn. He clenched his jaw and pushed it away, forcing focus. But the further they went, the louder it became. Visions flickered at the edges of his sight. Golden light, broken shields, a city burning beneath a red sky, and somewhere within that chaos a familiar sound, the crack of gunfire, the scream of engines, the cry of men who once called him brother. The corridor opened into a great chamber where alien statues loomed like gods of forgotten sorrow. At the center stood a pool of liquid light. Horus's voice crackled over the calms, ordering all squads to regroup. But Rogers couldn't move. The light rippled, and a reflection formed upon its surface. Not his own, but a man draped in white and gold armor, a shield upon his arm, its star blackened and burning. The figure spoke in a voice that was both his and not. You cannot save them. You never could. Rogers stepped closer, the weight of his breath heavy in his chest. What are you? Memory, it said. Echo. Regret. The warp remembers all that defied it, and you burn brighter than most. The surface of the pool trembled, and shapes emerged. Faces from his past, soldiers he had lost, friends long gone. They reached out to him, their eyes pleading. No, he whispered. We're not real. We are what remains of what you believe in, the voices answered. And belief is power in this place. He staggered back as the chamber shuddered, the air thickening into heat and motion. The Astartes opened fire on phantoms that emerged from the walls, Eldar wraiths, half spirit, half shadow. Bolter shells tore through the darkness, each explosion lighting fragments of the visions Rogers saw. He fought beside them, the shield glowing with a light of its own, brighter with every deflection. Yet the whispers persisted. Between the screams and fire, one voice rose above the rest, soft, feminine, filled with sorrow. The Emperor's truth is a lie. Rogers froze mid-swing. The voice seemed to come from the light itself. He denies what he cannot control. You feel it too, don't you? The weight of faith, the burden of his empire. You will see what he hides from you. A surge of psychic energy exploded through the chamber. The lunar wolves staggered, systems flickering. Rogers fell to one knee, gripping his shield as the light consumed him. In an instant he was elsewhere. He stood upon a world of ash and ruins. Towers of gold lay shattered, banners of the Imperium torn and burning. In the distance a figure knelt upon a broken throne, armor cracked, face unseen, but he knew the presence. The Emperor. Around him the stars bled red, and above it all, a voice whispered from the dark beyond sight. Even gods can fall, Captain. He gasped and the vision broke. The chamber reappeared, empty now save for the dying flicker of alien fire. The Astartes stood silent, their armor scorched. Horus's voice called through the vox, demanding status, but Rogers did not answer immediately. He stared into the fading pool, seeing only his reflection, and behind it, the faint echo of that golden figure. When they returned to the ship, the debrief was brief and cold. Horus regarded him with concern. "You saw something," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Rogers hesitated. "I saw what could be." The Primarch's expression darkened. "Be careful with visions, Captain. The warp speaks in lies and truths alike, and even the wise cannot tell which is which." That night as the fleet left orbit, Rogers sat alone in his quarters, his shield resting beside him. He stared at its star, now faintly pulsing with light, as though responding to something unseen. The whispers had faded, but not gone. Deep within his mind he could still hear that soft, lingering phrase, spoken like prophecy, "You burn too brightly to be forgotten." He closed his eyes, unsure whether it was warning or promise. Outside, the warp stirred once more, watching, waiting, remembering. The days that followed were quiet only on the surface. The fleet traveled through the Black Sea between worlds, its engines a constant hymn of motion. Yet among the crew, rumors spread like wildfire, tales of strange visions seen during the campaign on the Eldar craft world. Some whispered that a warp entity had spoken to a mortal. Others claimed the Emperor's light had revealed a prophecy too dire to repeat. Captain Rogers said nothing. He spent his time in solitude, training, repairing his armor, and trying to silence the echoes that still clung to his thoughts. But silence in the Imperium was never empty. When the next campaign began, it was meant to be simple, a compliance mission on a fringe human world called Tharsis Reach, whose rulers had refused to kneel to the Emperor. The planet's people were strong, proud, and independent. They spoke of liberty and faith in themselves rather than gods or masters. Rogers listened to their transmissions before the invasion began, and their words stirred something deep within him. They reminded him of home, of a world long dead but not forgotten. Horus led the assault personally, his warships blotting out the sky. Orbital bombardments began at dawn, striking military centers and communication hubs with surgical precision. Yet even as cities burned, the people fought back, not out of hatred but out of belief. Rogers saw it from the ground. Civilians taking up arms, shielding one another, refusing to flee. It was not rebellion, it was conviction. He stood before a captured barricade as the smoke cleared, his armor blackened with ash. A woman lay before him, wounded, clutching a child. Her eyes burned with both fear and fury. "You claim to bring unity," she spat. "But all you bring is chains." He knelt beside her, his hands steady. "I didn't come here to enslave you," he said softly. "I came to stop the killing." "Then stop them," she whispered, looking past him toward the advancing line of Astartes. "Stop them." He turned. The lunar wolves were advancing through the streets, relentless, methodical. Every building that resisted was leveled. Every act of defiance answered with extermination. Rogers rose to his feet, fury and despair colliding within him. He activated his vox. "Horus, stand down your men. There are civilians here, children." The Primarch's voice returned, cold and commanding. "There are always civilians, Captain. That is the cost of compliance. Do not question my orders." But Rogers didn't move. He watched as a squad of Astartes prepared to torch a hab block filled with survivors. Something inside him broke. He ran forward, interposing himself between them and the building, raising his shield. The bolt of fire struck it in a shower of sparks. "Enough!" he roared. "This isn't war, it's slaughter." The Astartes hesitated. They had fought beside him. They respected him. But respect could not overcome duty. One raised his weapon again, uncertain. The standoff stretched thin as wire until a single word cut through the chaos. Horus's voice, thundering across every Vox channel. "Stand down." Astartes froze. Rogers turned, finding Horus striding through the smoke, his armor gleaming like molten gold. The Primarch's eyes burned with restrained fury. "You defy me before my sons?" he asked quietly. "I defy no one," Rogers replied. "But I won't stand by while innocents die for your emperor's pride." Horus regarded him for a long, tense moment. Then he turned his gaze to the soldiers. "Withdraw," he commanded. "All units cease fire." The silence that followed was heavier than any bombardment. Rogers exhaled slowly, lowering his shield. The woman behind him wept with disbelief. But as Horus stepped closer, Rogers saw something in his eyes. Not compassion, but conflict. Later, aboard the command ship, they faced one another in private. Horus spoke first. "You shamed me before my legion. You gave an order that would have murdered children," Rogers said, his voice firm but quiet. "You think this war spares anyone?" Horus snapped. "But do you think the Emperor's dream can be built without sacrifice? You speak of mercy as though it was strength, but mercy weakens men. It divides them." Rogers met his gaze evenly. "And maybe it does, but it's the only thing that keeps them human." Horus looked away, his hands tightening into fists. "Bye. You cannot change this Imperium, Captain. You cannot save everyone. You will learn that, or you will break." "Then let me break," Rogers said, "but I'll do it standing." Horus's expression softened. "Just barely. You remind me too much of what I used to believe." In the days that followed, the orders from Terra arrived. The Emperor had approved the compliance, but he had also heard the reports. Rogers's actions had not gone unnoticed. Some within the imperial hierarchy called him a heretic in the making, a dissenter against divine unity. Others, especially among the mortal regiments, called him the people's captain. When Horus presented him with the Emperor's message, it was brief, written in fire upon gold. "You are light, but even light must bend to order or be extinguished." Rogers said nothing. He only saluted and left. But as he walked through the decks, the soldiers turned their heads to him. Some nodded, others whispered his name like a prayer, and soon the whispers became oaths. In the lower decks of the fleet, among the human ranks tired of endless conquest, a quiet movement began to grow. They painted stars on their armor, small white marks on blue cloth. They spoke of a new idea, an imperium where belief did not mean obedience, where the Emperor's light could shine without burning. Rogers never asked for it. He never claimed leadership. But one night when he entered the training deck, he found hundreds waiting for him. Soldiers, laborers, even a few Astartes whose loyalty had begun to crack. They saluted as one. "We fight for hope," one of them said simply. "For the freedom you taught us to believe in." He looked at them all, his heart heavy yet burning with resolve. "Then fight," he said, "but not as rebels, not as traitors. Fight as men who remember what it means to be human." They raised their weapons and shields, silent but united. Among the endless dark, a new banner had risen, not a symbol of conquest, but of conscience. And far away, deep within the Imperium, something vast stirred. The gods of chaos whispered among themselves, intrigued by the mortal who dared defy the Emperor's destiny, not with hatred, but with hope. In the cold corridors of the flagship, Captain Rogers walked alone, unaware that his defiance had already begun to reshape the future. The shadow of rebellion had not yet taken shape, but the Imperium could already feel it. On every ship, in every regiment, whispers grew louder. The name of the Shield of Terror passed from soldier to soldier, carried in secret prayers and quiet oaths. Rogers had not meant to become a symbol. He wanted only to protect, to preserve what little light humanity still had. But symbols, once born, were no longer theirs to command. The Emperor's will was absolute, yet even he could not ignore disobedience within his legions. Reports from Tharsis reached Terra faster than the fleet itself. The message was simple and cold. A mortal leads hearts away from order. He must be corrected. When the summons came, Rogers knew what it meant before Horus even said a word. The Primarch stood before him in the stratagem, his expression unreadable, the great map of the Crusade burning between them. "The Emperor has spoken," Horus said at last. "He has ordered me to bring you to compliance, by any means." Rogers didn't move. "You mean kill me?" Horus's jaw tightened. "If you force my hand." There was no anger between them, only inevitability. Rogers had seen it in Horus's eyes for weeks, the tension between admiration and duty. The Primarch had grown fond of him, perhaps even envious of his unbending humanity, but the chain of command was divine. The Emperor's order was law. "We won't let your men fight mine," Rogers said. "They believe in something better. I won't make them die for it." Horus turned away, pacing slowly. "A better? You think defiance is better? You think hope will save them when chaos devours the stars? You've seen what lurks beyond the veil." "You know what's coming. I've seen darkness," Rogers said quietly, "but I've also seen men rise above it. You fight for an empire that's forgotten what it means to be human." Horus faced him again, and for a moment, sorrow replaced anger. "Then you leave me no choice." Hours later, they met on the surface of a desolate moon orbiting a dead world. The place was barren, no witnesses, no banners, only dust and silence. Rogers arrived first, the reflection of distant starlight glinting off his shield, too. Horus descended soon after, a storm of light and power, his armor gilded and his weapon, a great mace crackling with energy, resting easily in his grip. For a long moment they stood facing each other, two warriors of different worlds bound by conviction and fate. Horus spoke first. "We once thought of you as proof that even mortals could stand beside gods. But gods do not bend to mortals, Captain. They never have." Rogers raised his shield. "Then maybe gods need reminding that they were men once." The Primarch moved first. His strike was a thunderclap, the ground beneath him fracturing from sheer force. Rogers barely blocked it, the impact driving him back several paces, dust exploding in rings around him. Horus pressed forward, every swing carrying the weight of worlds. Rogers countered with precision, every movement guided not by power but by purpose. Their duel became a storm of motion and sound. Horus's mace met Rogers's shield again and again, sparks of gold and blue scattering into the void. The shockwaves echoed across the barren plain, each impact like the heartbeat of war itself. "You can't win!" Horus roared, striking with fury that shook the air. "I don't need to," Rogers said through gritted teeth, driving his shield into the Primarch's chest, sending him stumbling a step back. "We just need to make you stop." Horus's laughter was brief, pained and almost human. "You are a fool, Captain." "Maybe," Rogers said, his breathing heavy, "but I'm the kind of fool that still believes." With a cry, Horus struck again, faster now, his weapon a blur of light. Rogers deflected 2 blows but took the third across his shoulder, the energy field searing through armor and flesh. He fell to one knee, smoke rising from the wound. Still, he lifted his shield. The Primarch loomed above him, panting, his fury tempered by something deeper, hesitation. "A yield," Horus said. "You've proven your courage. Don't make me destroy you." Rogers looked up, eyes calm. "You already have." With sudden force, he lunged forward, slamming his shield into Horus's knee, twisting and bringing the edge up beneath the Primarch's guard. It struck with a sound like ringing metal, sending the great warrior reeling backward. For a heartbeat, the impossible happened. The War Master staggered. Then, with a snarl, Horus's power flared. He swung the mace in a wide arc, catching Rogers across the chest and hurling him through the air. The captain struck the ground hard, rolling until he came to rest among the dust and shattered stone. His armor was cracked, his breath shallow. The shield lay beside him, scorched but unbroken. Horus approached slowly, his weapon dim now, his fury fading. "You should have stayed by my side," he said, voice low. "And up together, we could have remade this galaxy." Rogers forced himself to stand, though every movement burned. "You don't build a better world by ruling it. You build it by earning it." The words hit harder than any strike. Horus's expression faltered, and for a moment doubt flickered in his eyes, but duty crushed it. He raised his mace again, then stopped. A voice vast and golden filled the air. The Emperor's "enough." The sound froze both warriors in place. Light engulfed the battlefield, blinding, divine. The Emperor's presence descended like the weight of eternity. Horus fell to one knee, head bowed. Rogers stood, trembling but defiant, facing the light. The Emperor's voice was calm but terrible. "Stephen Rogers, Vuven Rogers. You have inspired unity but not obedience, hope but not order. You are a contradiction the Imperium cannot abide. Rogers met the invisible gaze. And maybe what you call contradiction is what keeps us human. For a moment, silence. Then the Emperor's tone softened, if only slightly. You are not of this time. You do not belong in this age of iron and fire. The light dimmed. When it faded, Rogers stood alone. Horus was gone, his shadow swallowed by the teleport flare. The shield rested heavy in his grasp, its star cracked but still gleaming faintly. He sank to one knee, exhausted, staring at the horizon. The Emperor had spared him, for now, but the message was clear. His time in the Imperium was running out. Above him the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere among them, destiny turned its gaze once more toward mankind, and the first embers of heresy began to smolder in the hearts of gods. The light of the Emperor's presence faded from the barren moon, leaving only silence and dust. Rogers stood amid the ruin, his armor cracked, his shield scorched, and the echo of divine judgment still ringing in his mind. He did not know how long he remained there, minutes, hours, perhaps days. The stars above were indifferent witnesses, cold and eternal. When the teleport flare finally came, it was not mercy that found him. It was the custards. They arrived without words, their golden armor glinting like judgment incarnate. Rogers did not resist as they shackled him with manacles of light, psychic bindings that bit into his flesh, cold as the void itself. His body was weary, but his eyes burned with the quiet defiance that had always defined him. He was taken aboard a vessel unlike any he had seen before, its halls lined with statues of saints who had never been human, its air heavy with sanctity and silence. When he was brought before the Emperor once more, there was no audience, no council, no witnesses. Only the throne hall, vast, echoing, and filled with the hum of immeasurable power. The Emperor sat upon his dais not in anger, but in something far colder. Disappointment. You defied my will, the Emperor said, his voice neither raised nor soft. It was the sound of inevitability, of law spoken into being. Rogers lifted his head, his voice rough but unwavering. I defended lives. I stood for the people who have no voice in your wars. If that's defiance, then maybe you're fighting the wrong enemies. The golden figure leaned forward, eyes burning like suns. You presume to speak of right and wrong to me? His words shook the marble beneath them. You who fell into this age by accident, an echo of a primitive time when man still believed in heroes instead of unity. Maybe that's what you've lost, Rogers said quietly. Heroes. People who fight because they care, not because they're ordered to. The Emperor's silence was more terrible than his wrath. You have sown doubt among my sons, he said at last. You have inspired rebellion in the hearts of men who should know only obedience. You are a fracture in the harmony I have built. Rogers met his gaze without flinching. If harmony means silence, if unity means fear, then maybe it deserves to break. The Emperor rose, and the chamber trembled. But do you understand what you are saying? You challenge not just me, but the destiny of all mankind. I'm saying destiny isn't yours to decide alone, Rogers answered. And not even for gods. A long moment passed. The Emperor descended the dais, each step echoing like thunder. When he stopped before Rogers, he extended a hand, not in violence, but in command. You could serve me, he said, not as a soldier, but as a symbol. Become the ideal I require, a figure of unity, stripped of your rebellion, remade to serve my design. Rogers' eyes hardened. You want to make me into a lie. I want to make you eternal, the Emperor replied. Your strength, your conviction, they are pure, but they must be refined as iron is by flame. The chains tightened. The psychic bindings dug deeper, and for the first time, Rogers felt something pressing not upon his body, but his mind. The Emperor was inside his thoughts, sifting through memories, Brooklyn streets, Hydra bases, the frozen ocean, faces long gone. He tried to resist, but his will was absolute. You have lived for ideals, the Emperor's voice said within him. Let me show you what ideals cost. Visions engulfed him, worlds burning in the Emperor's name, humanity bound in chains of faith and fear, millions dying with praise upon their lips. He saw Horus standing at the edge of a future drenched in blood, saw the warp itself laughing in mockery. And then he saw himself, his image painted upon banners, his words twisted into slogans of obedience, a false hero serving a golden tyrant. No, Rogers whispered through clenched teeth. I won't be your weapon. The Emperor's power flared, the light unbearable. You will be what I make of you. You will be what I make of you." Something inside Rogers snapped. Not from pain, but from clarity. His voice rose fierce and steady. "You can't make me believe in something I know is wrong. You can break me, erase me, bury me, but you'll never make me stop standing for what's right." For the first time, the Emperor hesitated. It was not fear that stopped him, but recognition. In the mortal before him, he saw something he had not encountered in millennia: unyielding belief without worship, conviction without corruption. The Emperor turned away, his expression unreadable. "Then you will be forgotten," he said at last, at last. "Mystery will erase your name. No record, no memory. You will vanish from the Imperium, as though you never were. That is your punishment." The custards moved forward, seizing Rogers by the arms. He did not resist. "You can erase me," he said quietly, "but you can't erase what I've shown them. They'll remember, even if they don't know why." The Emperor did not respond. With a gesture, light enveloped the chamber once more. When Rogers awoke, he was in darkness. No stars, no sound, no walls, only the faint hum of stasis around him. His body was frozen, his thoughts fading like echoes in the void. Yet within that stillness, one thing remained untouched: his will. Somewhere in the distant reaches of the Imperium, the soldiers who once followed him still carried his mark, a small white star painted upon their armor. They did not know his name, but they remembered his courage, his defiance, his humanity, and in the warp where memory and myth are one, something began to stir, a whisper, faint and defiant, echoing through eternity. "I can do this all day." Time lost all meaning within the void. Captain Rogers existed in stasis, conscious yet unbound by motion, suspended between seconds that never ended. He could not move, could not breathe, yet his mind remained awake. It was both prison and torture, a silence deeper than death. Around him there was only the faint hum of containment fields, the endless darkness of exile. The Imperium had not killed him, it had erased him. And yet, even within that nothingness, his thoughts refused to die. He remembered faces, men and women who had fought beside him, who had believed when belief was dangerous. He remembered Horus, torn between loyalty and conscience. He remembered the Emperor's voice, filled with divine certainty, and how even that certainty had trembled when faced with defiance. Above all, he remembered the promise he had made, to never yield even when the world demanded it. Outside, centuries began to pass. The Great Crusade rolled onward, devouring systems, burning heresies, claiming victory after victory. But within the ranks of its armies a whisper endured. The name of the Shield of Terror was forbidden by decree, yet the legend persisted, spoken in the shadows of barracks, whispered between dying soldiers. A story of a man who had stood against gods for the sake of humanity. They called him the Nameless Captain, the Forgotten Star, the Martyr of Unity. No one could say if he had truly existed. The Mechanicum denied his record, the Custards swore no such prisoner had ever stood before the throne, and the Space Marines called it myth. But among the mortal soldiers, those who bled and died for the Emperor's dream, the tale grew, and with it grew the dangerous spark of something long thought extinguished: conscience. Rogers' stasis pod drifted through the void, carried by unseen currents. It was not chance but will, the will of the warp itself, that guided it. Across eons, the energies of the Immaterium brushed against the capsule, curious, hungry, and yet repelled by the purity within. The gods of chaos had whispered of him once, the mortal who had refused both faith and corruption. They had marked him, watched him, and now they began to stir again. The pod entered a forgotten region of space, a graveyard of derelict ships and ancient wreckage. It was there, among the ruins of a battle long dead, that a scavenger vessel found him. The crew were human, barely clinging to life in the fringes of the galaxy. They cracked open the ancient shell, expecting treasure, and instead found a man encased in armor faded by time, his body untouched by decay. The stasis field collapsed with a hiss, and Rogers fell to his knees, gasping as breath returned to lungs that had forgotten how to draw air. The scavengers stared, weapons raised. He looked up at them, his voice hoarse, eyes burning with light that should not have survived the centuries. "What year is it?" They told him, and he understood. Nearly 2,000 years had passed since his exile. The galaxy was no longer the one he had known. The Great Crusade was over. The Emperor no longer walked among men. Humanity had fallen into the very darkness he had sought to banish. The Imperium was now a theocracy of blind worship and endless war, built upon the very obedience Rogers had once defied. He listened in silence, each word carving deeper into his heart. The Emperor, entombed within the golden throne. The legions, broken by betrayal. The galaxy, consumed by heresy and rot. Everything he had tried to prevent had come to pass. He rose slowly, his armor creaking, his shield still in hand though its star was cracked beyond repair. "Take me to Terra," he said. The scavengers laughed. "Terra, it's a fortress of gods now. No mortal approaches its light." "Then take me as far as you can," Rogers answered. "The rest I'll walk." They thought him mad, but they obeyed. Perhaps it was the tone of his voice, calm, unyielding, or perhaps it was the aura that surrounded him, the strange pull of something greater. They brought him to the nearest Imperial outpost, a decaying shrine world where statues of the Emperor towered over fields of ash. When he stepped onto the soil, the soldiers fell silent. He did not announce his name. He did not need to. The sight of him, the ancient armor, the shield, the eyes that burned with conviction, was enough. Within days, rumors spread across the sector. A warrior of the old age had returned, a man who spoke not of the Emperor's divinity, but of his dream. He preached not rebellion, but remembrance, reminding them that unity without compassion was tyranny, that faith without question was slavery. His words were heresy, yet they did not sound like lies. The ecclesiarchy called for his death. The Inquisition labeled him an unsanctioned prophet. Armies moved to silence him, but wherever he went, people followed. They knelt, not in worship, but in understanding. They saw in him what they had forgotten they were fighting for. When the soldiers finally found him, alone, kneeling before a ruined cathedral, he did not resist. He laid his shield beside him and looked to the sky. "Tell them," he said, "that I never wanted to be a hero. Only a reminder, the shots rang out." When his body fell, the ground did not tremble, but the hearts of men did. The soldiers who killed him swore they saw light rise from his body, brief, like the reflection of a dying star. His remains were burned, his name erased once more. But in the warp, the echo of his final stand spread like a ripple through eternity. The gods took notice again, though not with mockery this time, with unease. His defiance had no source in faith, no tether to power. It was simply will, and will, they knew, could move mountains, even divine ones. In the centuries that followed, pilgrims began to carve a symbol onto the walls of their cells, the armor of their ships, the hearts of their banners, a single white star. They did not remember where it came from, or who had first carried it. But when they were afraid, when the darkness of the galaxy seemed endless, they whispered words passed down through generations, stripped of origin yet heavy with meaning. "I can do this all day." And somewhere beyond the veil of time, the man who had been Captain Rogers stirred once more, his memory alive in the conscience of a species that refused to die. The galaxy turned indifferent and endless, devouring centuries in silence. Empires rose and fell, faith became weapon, and the Imperium hardened into something colder than the Emperor himself had ever intended. The name of the nameless captain was long gone from record, reduced to nothing but a myth whispered by the desperate. And yet in the immaterium, the unseen ocean of thought and memory, his essence did not fade. Where most souls were devoured or twisted by the warp, his lingered untouched. It was not light nor shadow, but a steady flame, defiant, incorruptible. The Chaos Guards, vast and cruel, had taken notice. For all their dominion, for all their legions of demons and fallen champions, none had ever resisted them as he had. His soul burned with no prayer, no pact, no faith, only will. Khorne watched first, drawn by the purity of his battle spirit. The blood god raged within his brass citadel, his voice echoing through eternity. He was a warrior who knew no surrender. Khorne mused, his laughter shaking worlds. "Let him fight for me, and he shall be eternal." But when the call reached the echo that was once Captain Rogers, it did not answer. The fire of his essence flickered, but it bent to no will but his own. Then came Tzeentch, the architect of fate. The changer whispered in serpentine tones that rippled through the sea of souls. "You stood against gods once. Stand again, and I will give you the power to reshape all you lost." You could undo it, the tyranny, the corruption, the Emperor's throne of lies. The echo did not stir. The flame burned the same, small, human and steady. Slaanesh tried next, weaving visions of peace, of beauty, of a world reborn in harmony. "You have carried burden and pain beyond measure," the Dark Prince whispered. "Lay it down. Rest. Let the galaxy remember you not through struggle, but through serenity." The echo did not rest. The flame remained bright, and so at last the great decay stirred. Nurgle, patient and eternal, regarded the defiant light with something almost like pity. "You suffer alone, little spark," he crooned. "Even now you struggle to hold on. Why not accept what is? All things rot, all things fall, yet in decay there is peace." The flame flickered once, wavering, but then flared again, stronger than before. "I can do this all day." The words rippled through the warp like a thunderclap. The laughter of the gods ceased. The demons howled in confusion and fear. That single sentence carried on the current of eternity, tore through their dominion like a blade of truth. For the first time in uncounted eons, the warp recoiled. The echo grew brighter. The souls of the lost millions of mortals, soldiers and dreamers who had died believing in something more than obedience felt it. They turned toward it instinctively, drawn by the warmth. They did not know its name, only its feeling. Courage, hope. And in the darkest corners of the warp, that feeling began to take shape. It was not a man, not truly, but something born of his memory. A guardian wrought from defiance and faithless strength, formed from the collective yearning of humankind to be free of fear. The warp, in all its chaos, began to remember what it had once been before the gods poisoned it, a reflection of the soul, not its prison. The entity that emerged bore no face, no armor, no shield, but every soul that beheld it saw what they needed to see. The figure who stood unbroken before gods and emperors alike. The echo did not speak in words, yet its presence resonated with a single truth, the power of conviction without corruption. And wherever it passed, the nightmares of mortals grew weaker. Demons faltered when facing it, for they could not comprehend strength that did not crave dominion. They could not tempt it, for it sought no reward. They could not destroy it, for it was not born of faith but of choice. In time, the Imperium began to feel it too. Astropaths reported strange interference during warp travel, flickers of white light that scattered the voices of the demons, faint whispers that calmed madness during storms. Pilgrims told tales of a figure glimpsed in their dreams, a man holding a shield marked with a single star, standing between them and the terrors beyond. The ecclesiarchy dismissed it as heresy, branding the visions as psychic pollution. Yet even the inquisitors who ordered such purges hesitated, for some among them had seen it as well. On the battlefield, where faith was tested and hope burned thin, men began to feel an unseen presence. A soldier facing impossible odds would rise again when he should have fallen, moving as though guided by unseen hands. A dying captain, surrounded by the enemy, would find his fear replaced by calm resolve. In each case, the survivors spoke the same words afterward, though they could not explain why. "I can do this all day." The echo of the man the emperor had erased had become something eternal, a counterweight in the immaterium to the endless tide of despair. Not a god, not a saint, but a memory that refused to die. A symbol not sanctified by prayer, but forged in choice. In the heart of the warp, the four gods turned away, their interest waning. They could not control what they could not understand. And the flame that had defied them all burned on, untouched, unmoved, unafraid. Across the galaxy, in the hearts of mortals who still dared to dream, the light of that flame flickered anew, each act of courage, each moment of compassion, each stand against impossible odds. And in that light, faint yet steady, the warp itself began to change. Just enough for hope to exist again. The echo had become a whisper that lingered across the stars, subtle, invisible, and unstoppable. It was not worshipped, not prayed to, but felt like the distant warmth of a memory that refused to fade. Across countless worlds, soldiers on the brink of despair would pause before surrendering, hearing that faint, steady voice within their minds. Stand. And so they stood. Entire regiments saved themselves not by divine intervention, but by remembering what it meant to choose. On Istvan III, the storm was brewing. The War Master had changed. Horus Lupercal, once the Emperor's most beloved son, had begun to dream in the dark. Whispers from the warp seeped into his mind, subtle and poisonous. He saw visions of betrayal, of the Emperor's deceit, of falsehoods wrapped in gold. Yet beneath those whispers, another sound pulsed faintly, a voice he had tried to forget. "You don't build a better world by ruling it. You build it by earning it." The memory struck him like a blade through armor. Horus stood in his chamber aboard the vengeful spirit, gazing at the stars that stretched before him like a graveyard of light. His heart burned with doubt, pride, and grief all at once. The Chaos Gods had promised him truth, power, and purpose, but when he closed his eyes he saw Rogers standing before him again, shield raised, eyes unwavering. He tried to bury it, but the memory refused to die. The voice of Erebus, dark priest of the word bearers, slithered behind him. You hesitate, my lord. Why? The path is clear. The Emperor betrayed you. He betrayed all of us. Horus did not turn. And if this path leads to ruin, a ruin is only a word for those who fear freedom, Erebus hissed, and he would see mankind chained beneath his throne. You would make them free. Freedom. The word hung in the air like a ghost. Rogers had once spoken of it too, but the meaning had been different. The War Master clenched his fists, feeling the weight of destiny press down upon him like iron. I will not be his pawn, Horus said at last, voice low. If rebellion is the only path left, then rebellion it shall be. Erebus bowed, hiding the smile that curved his lips. Then the galaxy will burn in your name, my lord. And so it began. The Istvan system became the crucible of betrayal. The loyalists, though still sworn to the Emperor, were summoned under false pretenses. When they arrived, they were bombarded from orbit by the very legions they had called brothers. The ground turned to fire. Cities became oceans of molten glass. Amidst it all, the first cries of the Horus heresy echoed through the void, but not all voices sang in praise of the War Master's rebellion. Among the mortal ranks, those too small to be noticed in the wars of gods, rumors spread of something else moving through the warp. A presence that whispered of courage, of resistance against both tyranny and corruption. They called it the Light Between. On one transport vessel above Istvan, a squad of soldiers huddled in terror as orbital fire rained upon the surface below. One among them, a grizzled veteran, clasped a small charm, a crude engraving of a star carved into metal. Keep the faith, one whispered. The veteran shook his head. Not faith, he said. A choice. Moments later, when enemy boarding pods struck their hull, that same squad refused to abandon their post. They held the corridor long enough for 1,000 others to escape, their defiance echoing through vox channels in the words none of them truly remembered learning. I can do this all day. Across the stars, the heresy spread like wildfire. Legions divided, planets burned, and even the Emperor's dream cracked beneath the weight of its own contradictions. Yet in the warp, the small steady flame that had once been Steve Rogers grew brighter. It was drawn to the storm that Horus had unleashed, pulled by the gravity of tragedy yet fueled by the spark of defiance that still lingered within the War Master's heart. On the eve of the Dropsite massacre, as Horus prepared his final betrayal, he dreamed again. In his dream, he stood on that desolate moon where he had once faced the man with the star upon his chest. But this time, the captain was gone. Only the shield remained, half buried in dust. Horus knelt beside it, his massive hand trembling as he brushed the dirt away. Oh. The star upon it glowed faintly, white, pure, and unbroken. And a voice spoke from the shadows, not accusation, not condemnation, but calm understanding. You still have a choice. Horus turned, but no one stood there. Only light and dust, memory and consequence. The dream faded, but it lingered in him like a wound that would not heal. When the massacre began, Horus hesitated for a single heartbeat, long enough for one of his captains to notice, long enough for history to shift its weight ever so slightly. For though the heresy was destined, though the galaxy would still drown in fire, a seed had been planted deep within the heart of the War Master. A fragment of humanity's conscience, small and indestructible. As war consumed the stars, the echo of the captain's defiance spread unseen. Librarians attuned to the warp heard faint whispers in the heat of battle, words that steadied their resolve. Chaplains of both sides reported miracles amid slaughter, bolts of light that shielded mortals from the flames. No one could explain them. None dared to record them. But those who survived swore that, in the darkest hour, when all seemed lost, they felt a presence standing beside them, silent, resolute, and unbroken. Even as the Imperium fractured, even as brother turned against brother, the echo refused to fade. It lingered in the hearts of those who questioned, those who still believed humanity was worth saving even when gods did not. In the quiet aftermath of Istvan, as the smoke cleared and the stars burned red, Horus stood alone upon the bridge of his flagship. He looked out at the void, and for the first time in months he removed his helm. His reflection stared back, a conqueror, a traitor, a son. He whispered into the silence, almost to himself. Almost to himself. I still see your shield. And somewhere, far beyond mortal perception, the echo stirred, watching, waiting. For even as the galaxy fell into heresy and despair, the light between gods and monsters endured. It did not lead armies. It did not promise salvation. It simply remained, a reminder that one man's courage, even erased from history, could still change the shape of destiny itself. Millennia passed and the galaxy changed its face again and again, yet the wounds of the heresy never healed. Terra had become a shrine world wrapped in gold and silence, its skies blackened by the endless exhaust of devotion. The Emperor sat immobile upon the golden throne, neither dead nor alive, his light flickering like a dying star. Billions worshipped him, trillions killed in his name, and none remembered the man who had once stood before him and said no. The archives of the Imperium did not hold his name. The Mechanicus denied his existence. The Astartes spoke of him only in hushed myths, a forbidden tale traded among veterans who remembered flashes of courage that did not belong to any saint. Yet across battlefields and ruined cathedrals, among the dying and the forgotten, a pattern persisted, an old mark scratched into armor, carved into walls, or painted upon the hulls of ships, a single white star. On a nameless world at the edge of the Segmentum Pacificus, a young soldier crouched behind the remnants of a shattered wall as the war raged around him. The air reeked of blood and promethium. Above, orbital bombardment scorched the sky with lines of fire. His regiment had been shattered, his commanding officers long dead, and still the enemy advanced, chaos cultists clad in rusted armor, their chants rising louder than the artillery. He pressed his back to the stone, breathing hard. His lasgun was nearly drained, his courage ebbing. He could hear the screams of the wounded, the guttural laughter of the corrupted. His hands trembled as he reached for the small trinket around his neck, a charm he had carved himself, a crude imitation of that same star he had seen on a ruined cathedral years before. He did not know its meaning, only that it felt right. The enemy broke through the smog. Shapes moved through the haze, horned silhouettes, eyes burning red. The soldier raised his weapon out of instinct. He fired once, twice, then the gun clicked empty. He dropped it, gripping the charm tighter. "Emperor, if you hear me," he whispered, though, even as he said it, he wasn't sure whom he was truly calling. Something stirred in the dust, a sound, soft at first like the rustle of metal on stone. Then a flash of light. He turned, heart pounding. From the smoke stepped a figure, not divine, not monstrous, but unmistakably human. The armor was aged. Its paint faded to ghostly blue, and in his hand gleamed a shield with a star upon it, cracked and scorched but still whole. The soldier could not breathe. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The figure moved without haste, each step calm and deliberate, the sound of his boots cutting through the chaos like the rhythm of a heartbeat. When the cultists saw him, they howled. Bolts of energy screamed across the battlefield, but the shield rose and caught them all. Each blast deflected with impossible precision, arcs of light scattering into the clouds. Then he was among them, swift, merciless, not with rage but with purpose. His strikes were clean, final. Every motion spoke of a warrior who fought not for glory but for necessity. The soldier crawled from behind the wall, staring in disbelief. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He turned, his eyes hidden beneath the shadow of his helm, though something in his posture carried the weight of centuries. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, hoarse, steady, and deeply human. "Oh, get up." The soldier obeyed before he understood why. Together they moved through the ruin, the nameless warrior taking the brunt of every blast, the soldier following in his wake. For a moment, the boy forgot fear. For a moment, it felt as though the galaxy had meaning again. By dawn, the enemy was broken. The cultists fled, their courage collapsing like ash before the wind. The world was saved, though few remained to witness it. When the last echo of battle faded, the soldier turned to thank his savior, but the figure was gone. Only the cracked shield remained, half buried in the dirt. He lifted it with trembling hands. It was heavier than he expected, cold but alive, pulsing faintly with warmth where his fingers touched the star. He carried it back to camp, but when he showed it to the survivors, none believed his story. They called it. A trick of the mind, the Emperor's light maybe. But that night, as he sat by the fire, he ran his thumb along the shield's edge and saw, etched faintly into the rim, words worn by time but still legible. "Freedom is the soul of man." He did not sleep. At dawn he carved the star onto the wall of the barracks, and by evening, others had done the same. By week's end, an entire regiment bore the mark upon their armor. It spread again, as it always had, quietly without fanfare through the hearts of those who fought and bled and refused to forget. The ecclesiarchy condemned it as heresy. The Inquisition sent agents to root it out. but they could never find the source because it was not a person. It was an idea, a memory that survived where empires did not. And in the warp, where the souls of men flickered like candles in an eternal storm, something stirred once more. The gods felt it too, that stubborn spark that defied them, the same that had defied the emperor himself. The echo of a man who never yielded, whose name had been erased but whose courage could not be undone. The light of the star flared for an instant, illuminating the darkness, and from within it came a whisper that transcended time, carried through the warp like a heartbeat between worlds. Not a prayer, not a command, a reminder. You still have a choice. And in that moment on battlefields far and wide, across dying worlds and forgotten trenches, countless soldiers, imperial and heretic alike, paused, feeling something they could not name. Some wept, others smiled. Because even in a galaxy of gods and monsters, the greatest power of all still belonged to man, the will to stand, to fight, to hope. And somewhere, beyond the reach of history or faith, the man with the shield watched over them, silent and eternal.